Welcome. Okay, there's a few people still creeping in through the waiting room, I think. Delighted to see so many of our old friends and some new faces attending this new education event. We're here to cheer you up after Rishi's little chat yesterday, which basically says you're not getting any more money, you're all going to have to buy your own hand sanitizer, you're not getting a pay rise, but don't forget you can get 10% off at Morrison's. Anyway, that seems to be the message for education clients at the moment. So we're here to try and dispel all that doom, take a bit of time out in our virtual staff room. Katie, Alexis and I were hoping very much to be in one little room to talk to you all together as we normally do. But sadly, we're all in solitary isolation, as indeed many of you are by the looks of it. So welcome anyway. For those of you who don't know, I'm Jane Eatock, partner in the employment team at Wilkin Chapman, specialising in education work. My partner Katie is the same and it will be speaking, and we're working with Alexis from Fortis Therapy and Training, who again I know works with very many of you across this region. So what are we talking about today? Well, we're going to start. It's a casual chat. We build it as a virtual staff room. We hope you've all got your brunch boxes. It's some considerable time since we met you all at one of our breakfast events. And we know you only come for the bacon buns. So we decided we better bribe you into coming to this webinar by sending you out a brunch box. Big shout out to our friends at the Riverhead Cafe in Grimsby for providing that. Fantastic to be supporting a local business there. Really thrilled to do that for them. Obviously, it's all pre-packaged because it was sent out in the post. But those of you will know it's a fabulous cafe with wonderful cakes and sandwiches and everything. So we hope you'll all support them when they do eventually open up again. So relax and enjoy your brunch box while we chat. Quite a bit's happened really since last time we met, hasn't it? We're not going to focus on COVID really this year. Today, you've had enough of that all this year, I think. What we're trying to do is talk about dealing with difficult situations, of which COVID is one, and has made everything you do slightly more complicated. So well done for getting this far, and let's see whether we can help you with some sort of tips and chats. It's not a PowerPoint thing, it's not a corporate event. What we're hoping is, we didn't really want to compete with the government advisors. We didn't want to be doing that. Next slide, please, all morning. So we're just going to chat. Hopefully you can scribble down a few notes and take away a few thoughts from the event. So the difficult situations in the last 12 months have made planning and preparation even more important. You've all had enough of all that, I'm sure. How do we react to situations? How do we build positive relationships? How do we deal with complaints and grievances, etc.? That's the general theme. I've got to do a few housekeeping points to start with. It's completely laughable that I've been given the task of giving you the technical information. So I'm just going to read out what I've been told. First thing to say is this event is being recorded. Now, we're not going to be publishing it all over YouTube, but it is being recorded. So if you choose to participate later on, you might want to be a little careful about what you say, as it won't be anonymous. Please stay muted whilst the speakers are speaking. There'll be time at the end when we're going to ask you to unmute yourselves. As I'm sure you've all done Zoom to death by now, use your microphone symbol to mute and unmute yourself. We'll be using the chat to collect questions as we go along. So if you've got any thoughts as things come up, please feed them in through the chat function, which is the little speech bubble. And raise your hand towards the end. We're going to ask you to participate if you'd like to. And if you raise your hand, we'll come to you and you can speak live on screen. If anybody's having any technical difficulties, you may not be able to hear me say this, but please, again, send a message through chat or contact Taryn, our events organizer, who sent you the email yesterday, and she will help. Okay, so that's all the technical information. We are doing a few fun surveys as we go through the morning, starting with one in a moment. Please do join in. Remember, the surveys are anonymous. We're just asking you to give a quick reaction, tick a box, and the results will come up on the screen for us to have a chat. So I think if Taryn is listening to me, the first one's going to come up on your screen now. And could you all have a quick vote? And we'll see what you all think. Okay, have we all made a final decision? Can we see the results there now? So by a small margin, Boris gets the vote as being the person who's caused you the most hassle during the current pandemic. But I noticed there that staff come a very close second. Parents, gratifyingly, some way down the list, and as always, the kids have proved no problem at all. So that's an interesting outcome for us. Okay, well, we're going to start with Katie, who's talking about preparing for crises, and I'm going to hand over to her now, and I'll be back to talk to you a little bit later on. Thanks very much, Katie.
Thanks, Jane. Good morning, everybody. Great to see you all on today's session. So I'm going to talk about how to improve your relations with all members of staff, parents, pupils, everybody who's involved in a school community. And so hopefully you're in a better place, you've got happier staff, people who want to send their parents. So hopefully we won't get any issues, we would hope. So what is relationship management about? Well, it's about getting the best out of everybody, communicating, engaging, gaining the trust of all parties. And when I'm talking about all parties here, I don't just mean staff, I mean your parents, I mean pupils, the governors, everybody associated with the school. And relationship management, to be good, makes a school run. A school is often called a community, a family. And as we know, in a family, relationships can be good and can be very bad. And so improving the relations between all parties can hopefully make you have a more successful school. And when I say school, I mean all the educational establishments who are listening today. So what does good relationship management look like? Well, it should just happen. It should be something that's constant. You should be trying to gain the trust of the parents, the trust of the staff. People should feel engaged and involved. You should communicate messages, all the things I'm going to talk about today. Because if you get those things in motion and parents trust you and staff are happy to come in and feel motivated, you're halfway there. We've got a happier place. Hopefully you'll get less issues. If you get your processes and procedures in place, you know, the things we talk about, you know, your complaints procedure, which Jane's going to talk about, some juicy complaints from parents, your parent code of conduct, so they know exactly what they are agreeing to. Again, hopefully it will resolve issues. And if you're in a better place when we get these things like we've had with the pandemic, when you have safeguarding issues, you'll be in a better place to respond to them because you'll already have the support of your staff and the parents. So communication is a major part of relationship management. How you communicate, when you communicate, who communicates how often will all impact on the success of the relations of parents, of teachers, of governors. Sure, that one of the problems with communication is the illusion it has taken place. So my first top tip today is make sure it happens, okay? And when I'm talking about communication, I'm not just talking about letters, I'm talking about delivering messages. You know, staff know what's expected. Staff knows what your staff know what the processes are, what your procedures are, what you expect. They feel involved. Parents know what's going on in school, what you've done to make the school safe during COVID. If you don't deliver messages, if you don't tell people, then how are they meant to know? The amount of times Jane and I are dealing with cases and we'll say, well, did they know that? And they'll go, oh no, they should just know. Well, unless you tell them, they won't know, okay? And we're not just talking about negative, serious messages. We're talking about getting positive news out there about how the school's doing, saying to teachers, you're doing really well, you know, sharing good news. It's not just all doom and gloom. We need some nice, good news nowadays. So people need to know who the communicators are in school. So what I mean there is who's sending those messages out to parents. Obviously, the more serious the message, you know, when you're telling them about a COVID case, a class being sent home, a safeguarding issue, it's got to come from, you know, senior management, head teachers, because parents need to know that it's being dealt with at the top. They need to have the trust and confidence that it's being taken seriously. But obviously on a day-to-day basis, you know, members of staff communicating with parents. Also, who's communicating to staff? Who's telling them? Who are, you know, you will have staff who are feeling very anxious at the moment. They're coming in, doing a great job. Some obviously are not so happy, but, you know, generally most people are stepping up. Who's telling them what you've done to make the school safe? Who's telling them that they're doing a good job? Who's holding the staff meetings? So you've got to get the right messages out there, and you've also got to use the right people to communicate. So what I mean there is, there are people who are not people's people and should never be put in front of a staff room and deliver messages, because they just get people's backs up. They don't know how to deal with challenges. They're not confident. They're not empathetic. So when you are having staff meetings, delivering information, when you are delivering information to parents, you've got to make sure that you use the appropriate people with the right tone. You know, some people just get people's backups, and we all know in our organisation who they are. And they're not the people you should put in front of a staff classroom and tell them to deliver serious messages, because it's just not going to go down well. So how do you communicate? What methods do you use? So I wanted to go now to one of our other polls. So Taryn, if you'd like to launch our second poll, and I'll give you now all a chance to take part in this. So this is about alternative methods of communication. Right, I think most people nearly there. 82%. I'll give it 2 more seconds. It's tense moments here. I can feel you all in the suspense. I think we'll stop it now. Thanks, Taryn. Right, yeah, 50% on Teams, 30% on Zoom, and WhatsApp lower with next to no one using Messenger. Now, actually, we've found that a lot. At Wilkin Chapman, we've been using Teams. I had no idea. I'm even worse than Jane. I had no idea about how to use Teams prior to lockdown, but we always have our meetings now through Teams. We use Zooms a lot. We're also using it now for a webinar. So there are all these alternative methods now, which obviously existed before, but because of COVID, we've been thrown into this new world, and it's got lots of positives. These are great ways to communicate to staff, to parents, to get messages out quickly. They allow you to react quickly to a situation. We've had lots of schools who obviously have to send classes home because somebody's got, you know, COVID, and they have to send that bubble home. If you send out messages through instant messenger, all those kind of things, you can get the messages out quickly, which is essential when you're dealing with crisis or emergencies. So use all these different methods. However, I've got a couple of disclaimers. Make sure that you use different methods. Some people just don't like IT, and they never will, okay? Eventually, people will have to cotton on, but you've still got people who prefer the letters, the phone calls. And letters and phone calls are very important. They're more personable. Obviously, you know, there's a voice at the end of the phone. Letters, you can go into more detail. Obviously, in a, you know, a WhatsApp message, and instant text messages and things like that you have to send quickly, you can't put so much information in. So although there are all these methods there, which are great, make sure you don't forget about the old school letter. It's really important. It allows you to send out more information. And as a parent myself, I really appreciate a letter every now and then updating me on serious issues or things that's taken place in school. Another issue with all these instant kind of message devices we get are the problems that arise. Us lawyers love them. They create loads of juicy cases, but people get trigger happy. People forget that you are still communicating and people are reading those messages. You can send things very quickly in the heat of the moment. You can use the wrong tone. Whereas a letter, you can read it and you can read it again. Jane and I sometimes, when we're having one of them days, have to send each other emails to check before we send it to make sure we're using the right tone. So you've got to be careful, because with these kind of instant messages, that you can get lots of problems. So make sure your communication policy is up to date, your social media policy is up to date, so staff know how to use these devices. I know you feel like you're teaching people to suck eggs, and they should know, but often they don't, and also it allows you to fall back on them if something goes wrong. We still get the situation where people think saying things on social media is different. It is not. It is the same as saying it out loud. And we get loads of cases still of people saying things inappropriately, you know, getting into arguments, getting into confrontation on social media. And when you're in a professional organisation, like, you know, a teaching profession, you can't do that. So when you're communicating to staff, when you're communicating to parents, to all associated parties, how much information do you give? Well, you've got to be honest, you've got to be transparent. What you don't want them to do is find out information later on social media, in the news, when it's been exaggerated, when it's not right, because you'll create distrust. You want the teachers and staff to know what's going on, so they feel involved. You don't want them to find out later. So you've got to get the messages out there, but you've got to provide the right amount of information. Parents don't need to know everything. I've been a governor. We used to get involved in lots of things, but we used to filter what parents needed to know. They don't need to know everything. You're involved in lots of decisions, and unless really it's relevant to them, they don't need to know. And if anything, you just cause anxiety. So make sure people have enough information. Staff will need more information than parents, but you've got to make sure it's appropriate. Also, nowadays you need to be communicating more than normal because we've got all these issues going on. Parents are obviously feeling quite anxious. Teachers are feeling anxious about coming into work. Maybe you want more staff meetings. You need to make sure that you engage with staff, that you are available. So before I start talking about some other issues like engagement and feedback, which actually all feed into communication, I just wanted to tell you some funny stories about when communication goes wrong. I'm sure you've got your own funny stories as well. So we get lots of the reply to all on emails. We get those all the time. It's so easy, you know, you just want to reply to your friend, you know, and we had a case with a teacher who wanted to send a message to their fellow teacher about the head teacher, forgetting they're replying to all, calling the head teacher an enormous fart. So it didn't go down well. You have to be really careful. We've also had WhatsApp messages where teachers reply quickly to parents, and we had them replying rather than calling the pupil's presentation a presentation. He called it a penetration. So you just need to be really careful, check your typos, check your messages, heat of the moment. I mean, luckily, most parents would see the funny side of that. We've had people who attach documents incorrectly to emails. We got a rather interesting Jamie Oliver cooking recipe, which was quite nice. So we got some nice meals out of that. We've had family shots and all sorts that's been attached. So again, they're quite light-hearted, but you just need to be careful. I can see that a lot of you now are using Zooms and Teams, which is great. Jane and I have had quite a few cases where they've been used inappropriately and incorrectly. People forget that the cameras are on, and we've had a teacher kissing a fellow teacher in the background, forgot the camera was on. We've had another one picking the nose. So remember, cameras on, people can see. We get the unmute, mute bit. Me and Jane are constantly doing this to one another to tell each other that we're not muted or muted. So again, you've got to remember, you know, all these new ways have problems and, you know, create issues. So you've just got to be aware. Like I said, if you get your communication and social media policy up to date, and obviously we can assist you with things like that, at least teachers will know how to use these new devices. So just wanted to cover a couple of other things. So running alongside communication is feedback. So as a school, seeking feedback from parents, seeking feedback from staff. We've had loads of people saying, oh, I don't feel safe coming in, or I don't think you've made the workplace safe because of COVID. Ask them, okay, what would you like us to do? How can we make this a better place? How can we make it safer? What do you think? If you involve them, first of all, they'll feel engaged and they'll feel like you care, you'll create trust, your relations will improve, but also they may have good ideas. You know, staff are on the floor, they see things. Maybe as a senior leader, you're not always available, and therefore they may be able to feed back. Also, parents love being able to feedback. You probably don't want all the feedback, I have to say, but it will at least create, you know, a community, an involved kind of trusting relationship. If you do ask for feedback, Make sure that you then say thank you, even if you can't take it on board because it's not particularly very good feedback. At least, you know, go back to the person and say thanks ever so much for that. It makes people feel engaged, it makes people feel interested, and actually you might get some good feedback which actually helps with the school. And also sometimes you'll find that the people who moan the most, when you actually say to them, okay, so how can we help, they don't have anything to say. It actually quiets them, which again is a good thing. So being accessible. So for all the things we've talked about today about communication, engagement, it's also about, you know, being there for your staff. I know that sounds really dramatic, but you will have staff who are feeling anxious. Alexis is seeing all kinds of mental health issues at the moment. People have lots of different challenges, not just about coming to work. They'll have personal issues. They don't know what is going on behind their closed doors. And therefore being approachable, you know, open doors policy. I don't mean literally having your door open. I just mean your staff knowing that they can come and talk to you, you'll help, you'll share issues. It will make them feel that you care, and hopefully you might be able to actually help. Sometimes little issues can be resolved very early on. Also being accessible, you know, to people who are sick or self-isolating, phoning them up. Phone calls are great. You know, they show you care, you make sure they're fine, you're keeping them informed, it will build up relations. If you have people who are at home and you never contact them, I get cases lots of time and people say, oh, I didn't know I was meant to phone them because they weren't at school or they were off sick. Phone them. I don't mean every day, but keep in contact, keep the communication channels flowing. It will make it easier for people to return, and it will build up a good and a better relationship. Also being accessible to parents. I'm a parent, and one of the big things I like is when I go to school and I see senior leaders walking around site, it makes me feel like I can trust sending my child. But being accessible by other ways. We've got clients who now use things like virtual hubs. So rather than having parents' evening and all those kind of things, which obviously they can still have, but they do it by different means, you can also have like a teacher being available once a week on a virtual hub, and they're, you know, members of the staff are there and people can come and ask them questions. Parents can speak to a teacher, you know, an hour a week. I'm not saying you have to do it every week, but being available in other ways, because you can't see people, you know, physically all the time. There's other ways you can make sure that you are available. So also things like, you know, quizzes. We do quizzes now, virtual quizzes. You can do staff socials online. You've got all kinds of things you can do. People are having hen do's and all sorts now, aren't they, by virtual kind of processes. I'm not suggesting for a minute you have a big office party on Zoom, but there's other ways that you can make sure that people feel engaged. We're coming up to the Christmas season. I've seen quite a lot of businesses who are having quizzes by using Zoom, and, you know, don't forget your office party. You might be able to do little things in different ways. And again, it's just about keeping staff engaged and motivated. Ultimately, I know it sounds really simple, but the more that you involve your members of staff, the more that they will work for you. Hopefully they'll be motivated, they'll want to come to work, they'll be happier. We all want happy staff. It makes life just a lot easier. So before I hand over to Jane, I just wanted to talk about just quickly resolving issues. So with all relations, not everybody will get on. And when we're talking about a school being a family, as we know, not all families get on. So you are always going to get issues, some conflicts. Jane and I are massive on early intervention. It's, if we talk to any of you about any issues, it's always about trying to nip them in the bud, trying to get to the root of the cause and resolve them before they become bigger and escalates. I know it involves a little bit of time and effort, but a little bit of time and effort might save a lot in the end, and hopefully you'll resolve all these formal processes that we have to get involved in. So being accessible and having this open doors policy will hopefully encourage your members of staff and parents to come to you first and try and resolve the issue before it becomes formal. What we're finding at the moment is things are quickly escalating because people are feeling anxious, and we're in this anxious climate. We see it a lot with clients, that they're just very emotive and want everything, you know, the day before, because we're in this anxious state. And so things that may seem minor are actually becoming more significant. So, you know, make sure you're empathetic as a, you know, a senior leader or whoever you're talking to. Make sure that you try and help. Don't just brush it under the carpet because you think they're being silly. It might be really silly to you, but it might mean a lot to them. If you've got two members of staff who aren't getting on, get someone like Alexis involved. We've used her loads of times. She's amazing, comes in, resolves conflicts. Often, you know, you can have grievances till the cows come home, but is that going to resolve the problem? Probably not. So you need someone like Alexis to come in and trying to get to the root cause and try and resolve it. And like I said, we are seeing more complaints, more issues than ever. So I thought I'd just mend my bit on a funny note about some funny grievances we get. We do get lots of serious ones, but we do get lots of funny ones as well. So the most common one we tend to get, and I don't know if you get this in your organisations, about complaining about the kitchens, the smelly microwave, the smelly fridge. Somebody's contaminated their egg sandwiches with something next to them. Somebody's used the microwave for fish. We get it all the time. At Wilkin Chapman, we get the fork stealer. And we get lots of emails, don't we, Jane, about somebody stolen all the forks. It creates, oh, honestly, it creates so many issues. The most ridiculous one I've had recently is somebody raising a grievance because their colleague was breathing too heavy. I don't quite know what we were meant to do about that one. And also typing. We get the issues about, oh, I can't get the work done because so-and-so's typing and I'm going to raise a formal grievance. So on a serious note, you will get issues, and hopefully by getting your complaints procedure, your grievance procedure, getting all those processes in place, you'll hopefully be able to resolve them quicker, and so you can get on with your 101 other jobs that you've got to do. So anyway, hopefully if you follow all of that, you'll have happy staff and you won't get any issues whatsoever. But if you do get problems, I'll hand you over to Jane, who hopefully will be able to help.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Just got to pick up on the fridge story to say my best one was a factory in Scunthorpe where a lady used to collect roadkill on the way into work and put it in the office fridge so that she could feed it to her pet snake in the evenings. And it caused quite a lot of distress when people were going in to get their yogurt to find mangled rabbits in the bottom of the fridge. Anyway, moving on. So I'm talking about crisis management. Keep calm and carry on, we keep being told, especially at the moment, don't we? Things are coming at you from all directions. We can't always tell what's important and what isn't. You've 1,001 things to do. You might have issues raised by staff, students, members of the community, parents, all coming at you. They might be labelled complaint or grievance, but then again, they might not. And yet that's what they might be. So we have to identify what is it that's being thrown at us and how we're going to cope with it. There's all sorts of legal, practical, reputational issues to think about. And what I'm going to try and do is just give you a few tips as to how to manage that, particularly because complaints never arise at a good time of the day, do they? Or a good time of the week, even if there is such a thing. They usually arrive in the middle of everything else that's going on. So just a bit of clear-headed thinking and a bit of guidance as to how to cope with those scenarios. So a bit of an overview on some techniques, and we're going to do 4 things: what, when, who, and how. Those are the things you need to identify. So first of all, what is it? What is it you're being confronted with? Is it something in writing? Is it a stroppy email? Is it a 4-page letter, particularly one of those written in block capitals, green ink, underlined, which we put in the nutter category? I have to remember that Lexis always objects to this word that I use, but we all know what we mean when we say it's a nutter letter, okay? So I'll let her talk about the proper psychological terms for things like that. But anyway, so is it written? Is it in an email or a letter of some form, complaining about something? Or is it verbal? Is it in person or on the phone? And are you being confronted by an angry teacher or caretaker or parent or child? Or is it a distressed teacher, caretaker, parent or child? Or indeed, is it our favourite, the local resident, who I can guarantee will be cross about either car parking, bus disruption, or children swearing? Indeed, I was watching one of those dreadful, educating Manchester, Yorkshire, Essex programmes the other week. Don't know why anybody ever lets the cameras into their schools, but still. And they had a neighbour coming along, a little old lady who some child had thrown a snowball and her husband had almost had a heart attack and she almost lost Fred, who she'd been married to for 63 years. And it was a big rant about the dreadful children throwing snowballs. So this sort of thing can crop up in any scenario. So you are confronted by somebody who isn't very happy, and they've expressed it either very clearly and shortly, or more often in some rambling, incoherent, non-understandable way, and you need to decide what you're going to do with it. So first of all, a quick sense check. We're trying to determine what is going on. So a quick sense check, but not that quick. Because if it is a 4-page rambly letter, it's tempted by the time you're at the bottom of page 2. And let's imagine, as a, for example, not related to any person living or dead, that it's about, I'm not very happy about Mr. Jones, the maths teacher. He is being totally horrible to my little daughter, Chloe. She is brilliant at maths. She is an absolute genius. He bullies her and intimidates her and only gave her 6 out of 10 in the test, and etc., etc. And you're reading this rubbish, and you may just miss at the bottom of page 3, and I'm not terribly happy about the photographs he started sending her on WhatsApp. Safeguarding issue buried amongst all this nonsense. And it is surprising how often what seems like a stream of trivia is then building up to some big revelation. So yes, a quick sense check, but not so quick that we don't actually get the real point, because nobody wants to have that bombshell sitting on their desk and not being actioned. So what is it all about? It might come neatly labelled. It might say grievance at the top or complaint, but more often it won't. And there are other things it could be. You know, is it a grievance or a complaint? Is it whistleblowing? Is it a safeguarding issue? Is it a discrimination or bullying allegation? Is it a legal issue that might involve your insurers? Is it about an injury, which remember includes a mental injury as well as a physical injury? Is there a legal element to this? So what is it, and how serious is it? Is it something that's going to be resolved, hopefully informally or formally? You don't live your lives as if you're going to end up in a tribunal or a court all the time. We do. We're always in a court or a tribunal, but you know, you're not looking at everything as if, where is this going to end up? But you just need to have that kind of gut sense reality check. And if in doubt, as we always say, phone Katie or I. We speak to all of you all the time about any sort of thing, and we'd always rather a phone call or an email saying, what does this sound like to you? How should we approach this? Better to do that than phone us in 3 months' time when it's all got embroiled and it's all got off on the wrong foot and you're ending up in a much more serious situation. So what is it? So how serious is it? And how urgent is it? And those things are not necessarily the same. You will all have been, I'm sure, on those tedious time management courses where they make you draw boxes and say, is it serious but urgent? Is it not serious but urgent? Is it not urgent but serious? Whatever, I've lost the plot now, but you know what I mean. Is it urgent? Is it serious? And the two don't necessarily go together. In our office, our regulatory team that we work very closely with, Dave Hayward, who is a former police superintendent who does lots of investigations with me and with Katie about safeguarding issues, bullying issues, that kind of thing. And he has a very good phrase, which we more or less have pinned up in our office now, which says, deal with the unusual in the usual way. So just because something seems a bit off beam or weird or complicated, or and this also applies to deal with the unusual complainant in the usual way. So just because they are in my technical nutter category doesn't mean we shouldn't treat them in the usual way. In fact, it's more important that we treat them in the usual way. So don't be fazed by something that seems a bit off beam or a bit weird. Treat it in the usual way. What would you normally do if somebody came to you with this issue? How would you progress it? And what policy or process would you use? And we'll go do that when we come to how. So that's what. First of all, what is it? So once you've identified that, when? Do you need to drop everything and do it now? Or can it wait? Buy yourself some time. Always buy yourself some time. No instant reactions. So if it's a verbal thing that you just received, phone call, diatribe, rant in the office, whatever, thank you for raising this with me. I've noted what you've said, and make sure you have noted what they've said. Doesn't need to be an essay or a verbatim. It just needs to be a few notes, the date, the person, what it is they're moaning about, a few brief lines, because by lunchtime you'll have had 700 other things arise. The whole of year 6 will have to be sent home. You've run out of sanitizer. School dinners have been cancelled. Somebody's crashed their car, whatever. So you need to just make the note there and then, a very small, brief, handwritten note, something that you have recorded what's been said. So thank you for raising this with me. I've noted what you've said. I'll need to consider what to do, make some inquiries, look into it. Okay, that's your initial response. But most importantly, do not simply say, leave it with me. Leave it with me to a distressed, angry, cross person is being fobbed off. So it's leave it with me and I will get back to you by lunchtime, the end of the day, the end of the week, next Tuesday. A specific date or time that you are going to reply to them. That doesn't mean you have to solve the whole thing by that date. That is just you setting up the next point of communication. Okay, so under promise and over deliver. I will get you back to you by 4 o'clock and then speak to them at 1. I will get back to you by Friday, speak to them on Wednesday. You are immediately taking heat out of the situation by controlling the process. You have taken control of this now. It's no longer a hassle. You are now in charge. You have set a timetable. You have set a framework. You've created expectations. Having set those expectations, you can't then breach them. So give yourself enough time. The temptation is, isn't it? And we all do this. Something comes in and you think, oh, yeah, I'll have to speak to them about that. Once I've done that, I'll go back to them. Once I've done this, I'll go back to them. No, go back to them now and tell them what you're doing. All about communication. As Katie said earlier, all about communication. So if it's a written complaint, a letter or an email, reply the same day. It doesn't matter if you can't answer it. You're not giving them the answer the same day. You are simply saying, thank you for your email or letter. I am looking at this. I will get back to you by X. It takes a minute to send that message. And can I say that message needs to come from you, not from your PA, a business manager, deputy. It needs to come from you to show you've taken it seriously, to show that you've responded, and to give them an expectation of when they can have the next communication. So your PA can draft it, but you need to sign it, or you need to send the email from your email address, because again, people don't want to feel fobbed off. So you are taking control, you're making them feel that they're being taken seriously, and you're dealing with it. So you're under control and you feel immediately better about it. And then you need a system for reminding yourself about that very important commitment you've made. So you need something in your diary, on your phone, on your electronic calendar, however it works for you, a post-it note on the wall. If necessary, write it on your hand, speak to Helen by 2 o'clock. I do that to my daughter. She goes round with cello lesson at 10 o'clock written on her hand. She still misses it every week. And also I noticed it's still on her hand for about 3 days, which suggests she doesn't wash very well. But anyway, beside the point. If you think writing on your hand might help, that would do it. So when you've bought yourself some time, you've set up a timetable, you've got a plan. You may have no faintest idea how to deal with this issue, but you have set some parameters in place and you've gained control. As I'm sure Alexis will say to you, gaining control takes away the stress. It no longer becomes this big problem. You've already got it in a system. So that's the when. We've got the what, the when, the who. Who is this complaint about? And who is it from? Now, who is it about? My first really important question is it about you? It will be. There will be no head teacher in the country who has not had a complaint against them, or an issue raised with them, or a moan from somebody about what they're doing or not doing. If it's about you, do not do anything. Do not take action. Do not involve yourself in any way. Do not respond. Do not investigate. Immediately pass it to some poor hapless soul like your deputy or the chair of governors. It has to go out of your hands. There has to be no conflict. Now, this is happy days. It's no longer a big problem on your desk. It's a big problem on somebody else's desk. So joy, somebody else is going to have hustle and grief for the next 6 weeks dealing with this irritated person. The joy may, of course, be short-lived, because you may find that your deputy's after your job, the chair of governors has never liked you, and the next thing you know, they're getting rid of you for gross misconduct following a massive investigation. But for the moment, for our purposes, it's a joyful thing because it's no longer your complaint that you have to deal with it. Before you pass all that on, do a short factual response to the allegations in the letter, okay? Not to send to anyone, but as you receive that concern, write down your response, which will form the base part of the investigation. And with any response, with any letter of complaint, with any issue, a few top tips. Do not feel you have to answer every point in there. Use the lawyer's technique of saying, you have raised a number of issues. I disagree. I'm not proposing to go through every one of them, but the key facts are la, 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 la. Pick out, set your agenda. Don't start responding to theirs. Identify what the key issues are and respond to those key issues in a factual way, not opinion. Throw away at least the first 3 versions so that you get into a version that's palatable and not full of emotion. So you don't write, I am not a pompous old windbag who doesn't know how to run a school. Your nightmare child might be doing better if you and your hideous wife weren't such totally hopeless parents. You know, that's what you really want to say. So write that first to make yourself feel better, then destroy it, then write, I'm disappointed you feel your son is not doing so well at school. We have noticed some deterioration in his behaviour. We would like to work with you and think it would be helpful if we made a joint approach between school and home. You know, let's just all tone it down and get professional, get the emotional rant over and get professional. But the most critical thing about who, do not deal with it if it is you. Having said that, make sure whoever you pass it to is going to acknowledge it the same day, saying, thank you for your letter / email. As this concerns Mrs. X or Mr. X, I am now dealing with it and will be in touch by X. So make sure your good techniques that you have developed are equally carried out by your colleagues so that we don't add heat to the situation. Who's it from? Is it from a known offender or serial complainant, of which there will be many? Is it what the doctors call a heart sink patient? Nothing to do with their heart, more about the way that you feel when they walk into the waiting room. Is it a heart sink patient? Is it somebody who sucks the life out of you, sucks the time out of you, and has always got something to complain about? Can I come back to Dave's mantra? Deal with the unusual complainant in the usual way. Deal with them as if this is the first time they've ever complained to you. Thank you for raising this with me. I will now deal with it. Respond politely. Don't put it off because it's that difficult person, because they're the very people you don't want to be fobbing off. Do act on it and do refer back to previous correspondence. I have previously addressed this question with you. Please see my letter of X attached. You know, use what you've done before. Don't feel you're constantly getting sucked into their world. So that's the who. The how. In your drawer, you will have lots and lots of policies and procedures. You will need to dust them off from time to time. This is the point to dust them off. They are there to help you. They are the tools to manage a situation. When you've created this time and space and you've set this timetable, dig out the policies and you'll be amazed to find that whatever you're being asked to deal with will fit into one of those boxes. You may not be sure which box, in which case, flagging up once again, speak to myself or Katie and we will tell you which policy to use. And don't be afraid to go formal. People like to just rant and whinge and moan. You can go back, and this is your first communication back after you've bought the time, said, I'll get back to you by Friday. Here is your message on Friday. I have now had the opportunity to take a preliminary look at your concerns. I am treating this as a formal grievance under the school's grievance process. I'm treating this as a complaint under our complaints process. Here is a copy of the policy. Make people fit into the system. You control that, not the other way around, not going down their line, because it will just repeat and repeat and repeat. So it's an art and not a science. Not everything fits neatly into a box. You'll have a safeguarding policy, complaints policy, whistleblowing policy, grievance policy, bullying or dignity at work policy, equal opportunities policy. Don't forget also, I hope most of you have a parental contract or school rules, something that says your child coming to this school, you agree to get them to school on time, wear the proper uniform, provide them with packed lunch, whatever. It's comply with the school rules, which include dress codes. Come to that in a second. So explain what you are doing. I am now looking at your concern under section 4 of our complaint policy. Okay. This method is useful to deal with passive aggressive people. You know, the sorts of people, staff members particularly, who come to you saying, I just want to raise this. I mean, I don't want you to do anything about it. I just want to raise it with you. That's no good. Once you know, and you can't unknow. So you have to say, you have raised this with me. I'm going to make a note that you've raised this with me. And I can either take this forward as a grievance, or we can talk about it in a different way, but we need to do something about it. Otherwise, I'm not accepting this information from you. I'm either accepting it and doing something, or you're keeping this information. Remember always, what are they looking for? What are you seeking to achieve from this complaint or concern you've raised with me? What are you asking? What are you looking for the outcome? Put the onus on them. It's not enough for them just to dump their problems on you. They should be coming to you with what it is they want to achieve. And encourage informal resolution. Most of your policies and procedures that we just mentioned will have an informal section. So informal doesn't mean you don't use a policy. You use the informal bit of the policy, which says, before a formal grievance, we will try to talk with you and your manager and find a way. We may find mediation. We bring in Alexis and her fab team again to broker that. So under section blah, I'm dealing with this as an informal grievance. If you're unsatisfied at the end of it, you can take it to a formal stage, get it into a system, document it every stage. Thank you for meeting with me today. We've agreed X. Thank you for meeting with me today. I will get back to you on Y. Keep that communication going. One-line emails, one-line messages are all that's needed. You don't have to rehearse everything. I also like the summary letter at some point in this, which is what I call the letter you'd like to wave round at a tribunal or a court, which says, in summary, 2 paragraphs. When you first raised your issue with me on X, I agreed to do Y. We have since met on Z. We agreed to do this. I assume this is now concluded. You know, box it off, put it all there in one letter so it's all contained. And I know I'm talking to you in a world of perfection. I know you're thinking, have I got time to do all this? Really, really short communications are better than no communication at all. You don't need to write everything down. And if this has now been dealt with, this is now concluded, future correspondence about it, come back to it again. This has now been addressed. Please refer to the letter of X. Or if you are unhappy, you now need to take it to formal stage under paragraph 12, etc. Simple diary notes. Only write down what you would be happy for somebody to read when they make their inevitable subject access request. Okay, let's be a little bit careful about the language we use. We can no longer write what we used to. I had a wonderful tribunal claim where the head called this teacher Mr. Memo Man, because he sent a memo every day about something he was unhappy about. And he became known as Mr. Memo Man. And in the tribunal claim, when we'd carefully made Mr. Memo Man redundant, nothing to do with his attitude or behaviour, but to do with the restructure of the woodworking department, and the barrister on the other side said, you called him Mr. Memo Man, didn't you? Oh, yes, I did. He was a bit of a pain in the arse, wasn't he? Oh, yes, he was. Okay, case blown out of the water in the first 5 minutes. So, you know, be very careful about how you use language because it may come back to bite you. So no talk of complaints would be complete, and this is my very last point before I hand over to Alexis, without mention of the Human Rights Act. Now, never did the drafters of the Human Rights Act imagine it would be used for such important purposes as whether somebody can come to school with a moustache, whether they're allowed to wear trainers instead of school shoes, and whether they can have the Union Jack shaved into their head. But every moaning parent, you will all, I'm sure, it is a badge of honour for all schools to appear on page 3 or even the front page if it's a slow news day of the local paper with some sulky, gormless looking child and some very aggressive mother, it always seems to be the mother, talking about how much her child has been abused by being sent home because his hair's been dyed purple. And this is abuse of his human rights. And one famous case in Hull Daily Mail, which I just loved, was about, it was a breach of his human rights not to provide Johnny, age 7, with only to provide him with a tuna sandwich for lunch because everybody knows he doesn't like tuna. And it wasn't his fault. He was in the toilet for too long and didn't get to the front of it. And this is a breach of his human rights to serve him a soggy tuna sandwich. I kid you not. It was on page 5 of the Hull Daily Mail several months ago. Unbelievable. Anyway, Human Rights Act has no place in parental complaints, right? But this is where you are prepared in advance, in accordance with Katie's suggestions, by having a nice parental contract, set of school rules that says, if your child attends this school, they must have normal looking hair. I think I will have told many of you before, but I do remember my a teacher, which we had to suspend, who said to a child, what on earth have you got done your hair like that? Tram lines and stripes. And he said, I do find the more stupid the child, the more stupid the hairstyle. So, which is probably what they all thought, but probably not something to say out loud and involved in massive investigation and complaints from parents, etc., etc. Anyway, I'm sure none of you would use such inappropriate language, but the Human Rights Act is going to get them nowhere. Nobody's ending up in court. All you need to do is say, we are disappointed Mrs. X feels like that. We are very happy to welcome her child back into school, but he must comply with the rules that we apply to all our pupils on an equal basis. So, you know, keep it nice and neutral. Anyway, you now have some top tips: who, what, when, what was the other one? How, who, what, when and how, and deal with the unusual in the usual way, buy yourself time and speak to us if we can help you. Right, I'm now going to hand over to Alexis, who's going to talk to you about relationship management.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks for all those really brilliant examples as well. Okay, so I want to talk to you about what is unsaid a lot in relationship management and how to effectively manage that. And it does come back to some of the communication things that Katie was talking about earlier, but and also we're in a position at the minute where the situation is evolving all the time and there is no end point. So from an anxiety perspective, the fact that we haven't got an end point means that we don't know how to plan for that. People don't know how to manage when something's ongoing. So all of those factors, kicking in at the moment. I want to just do my first poll, if that's okay, Taryn, if you're on there, just to see what your response is to this one. So you can select different answers for this. Okay, 78%, just one more second. Okay, so we've got well-being out there, which is fantastic to hear because it fits in very well with what you said earlier about it being staff that you're finding, the people you're having to manage and think about. Pupil education, which is interesting. I think I should have put another box on there about COVID because I know that conversation is happening all the time. So that's great because that really links in with what I want to talk about. So some of the themes that we've been seeing emerge are some really good things. So schools, we're in schools, several schools every day of the week, and we're seeing that there are innovative ways of managing in school in regard to the children, in regard to the communication with parents and with staff as well, that probably wouldn't have been things you would have considered before lockdown. It's because we've had to be creative, and there's been a lot in the news about businesses pivoting, but schools have had to do that as well. You've had to be really creative in how you approach things, and some of those things have really helped. So children moving around school less, lunchtime triggers that might have been there before. We're seeing a difference in behaviour in school. So there's lots of really helpful things that have come from that. We're also seeing some really positive responses from parents. So what you're doing to support the community, what parents are getting from you has made a huge difference. And I think that's really helpful because, without having been through what we've been through over the last few months, that intensity of improvement probably would have taken years to achieve. So, that's a really good thing that's come out of it as well. And also some people really like the restrictions. It makes life a bit more simple. We don't have to go and see Auntie Nellie, who we hate spending time with every weekend. And I know you've all got people like that in your lives you'd rather avoid. So it makes life a bit more simple. Other people, however, have found that more difficult. So we've also seen, at Fortis, we've seen an increase in referrals of all ages from all sorts of different places. We've also seen an increase in requests for staff support and leadership support as well. So whether that's about wellbeing sessions, reflective practice, coaching, and then a lot of emotion. So there's, we've talked about anxiety, we've mentioned that today. Anxiety is really high. And when I've done engagement sessions with staff across a range of different schools, there has been a lot of anxiety that's come right from the pit of their stomach that's been expressed. And you're living in that as well. So we know that that's causing us to be far more hypervigilant, more, sensitive, all of those things that we see a response probably more readily than we would have done before. The resilience levels have been affected. We're also seeing school staff struggling. There's the isolation, the bubbles that you've done to create safety, which are brilliant. There's also, you lose that connectedness between people. And so that is a struggle for some people. The workload, meetings and conversations which become far more task orientated than, that kind of niceties, the kind of checking in with each other, things you might do when you're making a coffee in the staff room, that kind of thing. Less opportunity for that. And it feels a bit less personal, I think, is one of the themes that comes out in those conversations for staff. There's also those own personal circumstances. So we're all living in this as well as everybody else is, whilst trying to manage what we're managing and helping them manage what they're managing, not necessarily knowing what that is. So, so yeah. So, you know, how do you learn about the people who are in your organisation and what else they're doing? So, you know, we have different strategies we help people with, and you might have come across things like weighted blankets, which are to help with anxiety. But conversely, at the moment, it's almost like people are carrying their weighted blanket around with them at the moment all the time, because there's all these responsibilities that we don't necessarily know people have got, which I'll talk a bit more in a minute. We're also seeing splits as well in teams, quite a lot of agitation with other people. Some of those examples that Katie and Jane were talking about, that, you know, by the time they get to them, it's like, we want to raise a grievance, this isn't, but those behaviours, there's a reason those behaviours are escalating. And some of it is that people are feeling, you know, unheard, unseen, things are unfair. There's a whole range of different emotions behind that. There's also a risk of sticking very rigidly to policy, which I know Jane and Katie are going to say, no, stick to policy. But sometimes if we're not sure about how to approach a situation or a person, we'll go back to policy and hide behind a policy as opposed to having a conversation. So what I'm saying is the policy is there to inform you, absolutely. And as Jane said, dust it off and use it. But there's also that bit before that. So, you know, how are you approaching people and what conversations are you having or not having? We're also seeing what I affectionately refer to as senior leadership battle fatigue. You know, so every day you're resetting, you're going in and you're trying to make sure that you're covering everything you need to cover. Sick of talking about COVID, sick of talking about risk assessments, things that, you know, a few months ago you weren't even in your vocabulary suddenly, and now things you're managing all the time. And you're under untold pressure to keep people safe in school, when actually some of their behaviours outside of school aren't that safe. So, you know, it's a really difficult situation. You've only got so much control over, but you're expected to make decisions to support people. So those are all the different themes. I mean, there's lots more, but that's a summary of all the themes we're starting to see in schools. There's a second poll I'd like to answer, if that's okay, which is, there we go, which is if we asked you before the pandemic who you would need to be supporting most in your staff team during the pandemic, where would you have been? Okay, just a couple more seconds. Okay, so we've got, I'd have been spot on, which is interesting, isn't it? Because the people that you've had to probably spend more time managing are people you've probably always known you needed to spend more time managing. And also the I'd have been surprised at 43%. So it's not far behind, is it? So what we're seeing is that there are triggers for staff who previously may have been able to not necessarily hide, but would have been more resilient, would have been able to cope, but there are lots of things going on for them at the moment. So we've got the people who would have been predictably ones that you knew you would have maybe needed to support, and then those ones that actually it's maybe felt like it's come out of nowhere. So a lot of those reasons are linked to some of the advice we've been given. So I know we're not focusing on COVID, but I just wanted to give a bit of context. We're being told to socially distance. And, you know, that's what the whole language is around. But actually, what we need to be doing is physically distancing and staying socially connected, because we need it. You know, we're human beings. So you've managed to set up your school so you've got bubbles, so you're keeping people safe, the one-way systems, all of that, which is fantastic. That's your physical distancing taken care of to a point, as much as you can. But where are you at with your social connection? We all need attachments. We all need to be able to speak to people. We need to be able to have a laugh with people. You know, when was the last time you had a real good laugh with someone at work that you know is connected to you, that you kind of go to and have some banter with? You know, meetings become more task driven because you've got a set amount of time to get everyone together. So the innovation and the creativity now and ongoing really needs to be around how are we going to keep that social connection so that we are communicating in a more human to human kind of way. We are seeing behaviour from the adults, and the question I always go with that is, what's that about? what is that behaviour about? If you've got a child in your class or a young person and you see their behaviour escalating, you will look at that behaviour, hopefully, and think, right, that's a symptom of what's going on for that child or young person. So what is that reaction about? It might feel personal, but it's invariably not personal. It's usually about something that's going on for them, and they're just happening to throw it at you, project it your way. So what is the behaviour telling you? How are they actually feeling? And are they looking for attention? Is it attention-needing behaviour? Now, we often talk about attention-seeking behaviour, and that's often had a real sarcastic, flavour to it. Oh, just attention-seeking, roll of the eyes comes with that. But there's a reason that that person is looking for that. Or are they not attention-seeking at all, or attention-needing, and actually what they're doing is retreating and withdrawing? So all of these behaviours tell you something before you even have a conversation with anybody. Adults are no different. We aren't any different. We just might have a few more different ways of managing or hiding or whatever to children and young people, but we still have our context. So one of the things I would ask you is, what are you noticing about those people? What's changed? Are there changes from what they were like in February to where they are now? What's their context? What's the behaviour telling you? What's being unsaid? So behaviour, non-verbals, all of that tells you an awful lot. So they'll be acting out in certain ways. They might be colluding. They might be kind of getting people on board. There might be splits. There might be all sorts of things going on. Instead of being annoyed, which I know it is annoying, but instead of being annoyed, try and step back and observe. So get in that helicopter and observe what's happening. What does it tell you? Because there's an awful lot of information there that you might not be seeing because you're feeling attacked or you're feeling emotional, hurt, rejected, all of those things yourself. That all plays out in this relationship. So be aware of where you are and be aware of where they are. What's happening in their personal lives? Have they got a partner that's at risk of redundancy? Are they going through restructures? Is their relationship in difficulty? Have they got children who are, that they're struggling to manage? Have they got children isolating at home? Who are they caring for? Is it parents that are caring for? What is the story? What's the story about that person? The way I consider that, and I was talking to a few people on the call about this yesterday who will know who they are, but think about the lenses that you're looking through. Are you looking through your lens or how you see it? So your frame of reference, or can you put that down for a minute and put theirs on and have a look through those and just see what might be going on? If you can do that, then you start to get a lot more information about what's unsaid and a lot more information about how you can approach that relationship and how you can maybe have a conversation with that person and listen to what they're saying. You, as leadership teams and as leadership people, you need to be accessing support for yourselves. At the moment, there's an awful lot of people looking to you to know what to do. There's an awful lot of stuff that you don't know and you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So what have you got in place that supports you? Is it someone like me who comes in and does reflective practice and coaching? And, do you have colleagues that you trust that you can bounce ideas around from? Who are other people supporting and how are they being supported themselves? So think about that network you've got in school, but also how you can outsource some of that, because sometimes talking to someone who's not connected is massively different and it's massively more effective. If we're thinking about communication, as Katie was talking about earlier, the definition I really like is a successful conveying or sharing of ideas and feelings. Now, the feelings word is the bit that gets in the way because we all kind of go, oh, that feels a little bit uneasy and unsteady. That's a bit of a grey area. I'm not sure what they're going to say. And I love that. I love stepping in and going, right, let's see what's happening here. What is that about? What is going on for this person? So some of the key things I would say is listening. And I know there's going to be people who have probably got their videos off as well going, oh, here she goes. But listening is really important. It's one of our key skills, but it's not necessarily one that everyone's trained in. And we think we're listening, but actively listening, I actually listen for hours a day. It's bloody exhausting if you're doing it well, because actually you're giving that person the time and the energy and you're really focused on what they need. So your active listening, which I'll talk a bit more about in a minute, notice. One of the things with mental health and well-being is, what are you noticing? So if I've got somebody who's really anxious and unwell, I'm asking them to notice what's happening around them, what keeps them grounded. But there will be things that you might be missing because you're busy and because you're full on and you're having to make decisions all the time. What are you noticing? What are the non-verbals? that you might be ignoring. So there might be a physical response you have to someone, a real internal response that you kind of think, oh, okay, whatever, I've got to deal with this. Just recognise that feeling. Even if you haven't got time to think about it and reflect on it there and then, it tells you something. That's your connectedness to that other human being. About your level of understanding. So you might be thinking, do you have any idea how much I'm managing at the minute? And this person is acting up and wanting some attention from you. And it is annoying, but there's a hell of a lot of information that you might be able to gather just from watching, thinking about your internal response, listening to what they're saying. Trust your human senses. You're human to human, you know, and absolutely, by the time you get to the stage where you need Jane and Katie to step in to tell you how to stick to the policy and how to cover yourselves, so that's because that's what that's about for the future. But actually, on a human to human level, what are you avoiding? How can you help that person? How can you step in? And who do you need to help you? You're all expert communicators because you do it for a living. You give information all the time. You'll be teaching, you'll be talking, you'll be listening to people all the time. And you've also got those social skills that engage children and young people. And for some people, engaging young people and children is a skill in itself. So, you know, you've got amazing skills. It's how you're using them with those adults that you've got around you. By rights, communication should be easy because you're doing it all the time. But actually, the pace of school, the pace of life, the amount of work you've got to do, I appreciate makes that really difficult. But I'm not talking about setting loads of time aside to listen to people. What I'm talking about is the quality of the time you give to people, okay? So if I've got a therapist who's working with somebody, we could, in 30 minutes, we could pick up an awful lot of information that become really helpful for them and for us. It's the same for you. How much are you doing small amounts of communication, listening, but it's not really giving you what you need? So how can you plan that differently? How can you factor it in? And how much are you directing communication? So Katie was talking earlier about, you know, how you might use all these different platforms we've got now. There's a whole menu now we didn't even know about earlier this year that you're all using and communicating brilliantly with. So, but how much of it is one way? How much are you directing, being authoritarian within that approach because you've got limited time? And where are you factoring in the communication that comes back the other way? Because if you're directing communication a lot, what you'll probably find is, and this is a massive sweeping generalization, but what you might find is that you've got people who'll be really compliant, who will just go, right, okay, and they go off and do it, even though they might be overwhelmed and overloaded and struggling. They'll just do it because you've told them to do it. Or you'll find people who'll start to rebel. So you'll have people who maybe won't do it or won't do it as fully as you wanted them to, or will get other people on side because they don't like it, you know? So you need to have a two-way process. It is a two-way process. And how are you factoring that in? I know a lot of schools who are, asking staff to be off site as soon as school finishes because you want to keep people safe, which means the staff meetings have reduced, or, you know, you're doing briefings and that kind of thing. So you've got that going on, but okay, so how are you going to factor in getting a bit of feedback the other way? Okay. I don't know if anyone's looked at, I'm sure some of you have, the UK's National Occupational Standards for Teaching and Learning. And in there's quite a few good standards around what we're looking for from teachers. And it's around contributing to positive relationships with children, but also providing effective support for colleagues. And now is the time for that community aspect, the family feel that Katie was talking about. Listening needs to be part of the school toolkit. If it can be taught, it doesn't have to be something that people naturally do. You know, I've done many years of training to be able to listen and clear my head and be able to focus on what someone's telling me, even though I might have stuff going on for myself. It's seen more as a kind of soft skill rather than a critical skill. But actually, and I know there's more emphasis on planning lessons and, you know, effective curriculum and outcomes and everything else. But actually, if you haven't got people on side and you're not listening to what people are saying, you're making assumptions about what they might be feeling and saying, then you will get down the wrong path at some point, because that's all coming from your own lens and from that helicopter view that maybe you haven't got everything in there that you need from that perspective. You might agonize over correct words for emails. So like Jane gave you some examples there about how you could word something that will mean that you're not in hot water, or who needs to word it. you'll think a lot about that and you'll factor all that in. But when you're in a room with someone and you're having a conversation, how much have you thought about what you're going to say or how you're going to approach it, how you're going to position yourself? Because if you haven't thought that through and you're anticipating it's going to go badly, guess what will happen? It will go badly because you haven't thought it through. Think about what hat you've got on. Think about how you're approaching that person, your relationship with them. Quite often words come gushing out without much thought, whereas you might sit down and do an email for 20 minutes before you send it or throughout the day until you're really happy with it. So, you know, our communication is very often more verbal than anything else. And also, how much informal communication are you having? Are you having those bits of play, you know, those kinds of conversations where you catch someone in a corridor? Probably not, because everyone's staying where they are. How are you going to do that going forward? Because this isn't going away. And what we're seeing for staff is that that's the bit they're starting to miss. Okay, so there can be things you can do. You've got the platforms, there's things you can do to kind of have informal conversations, informal get-togethers. The good listening isn't about how much time you've got, it's about the quality of time you give to, the quantity of time you give to it, quality. So if you are looking to support somebody and you want to create this within your school, think about whether or not you've actually got a listening culture. Are people really interested, or are they actually full and not taking account of what is going on? If you plan some time to talk to somebody or listen to somebody, then try and set arrangements, because that's the other thing that keeps happening. And I totally get it, is that there's another priority, there's a bubble to close down, there's something else that's kicked off that you've got to go and look at. And I totally get that. But if you can factor in, might not be you who needs to do it, it might be someone in your team, but if you can factor in time to listen to somebody, then try and keep that time, because it shows that you value them, it shows that they're important, and it also gives you some structure as well, because otherwise you're firefighting constantly. Also make sure that there's the right person doing the listening. You might not be the right person. As Katie said, you know, it's about the relationships. If you've got somebody who's going to listen in your team, who's going to go and listen and talk to somebody, and they're not the right person for that conversation, and you know that, just make a different decision and put the right person in so they're having that. The other thing I see in schools is that is the avoidance of conversation. You know, I'll just tiptoe around the edges. We'll talk about what's going on and what's happening for that person, but we're not going to step in. If you step in, that early intervention, that preventative stuff is what you're focusing on. It's not nice to go into a situation and not know how it's going to be. I do mediations and therapy and stuff every day, and I never know what's going to happen. But if you trust the fact that you can manage it, and that if you don't know how to manage it, you know who to talk to, and that, as Jane said, you'll come back to them and you'll speak to the right people. Don't avoid it. Step in, step towards that person, and have a conversation. Try and suspend your thoughts about what might be going on and what might happen in the conversation, because that anxiety loves that. What if they get cross with me? What if I am not prepared? What if they say this? What if they get angry? What if? Try and suspend that if you can, because as soon as you go down the what if route, you are, I haven't got COVID, by the way, just so you know. If you're coming into what if, you are already adding so much emotional weight to that conversation. Go with what is. Just go in and be with what happens, and trust the fact that you will figure it out. And if you can't figure it out, you can go in and talk to people. Well, however ill-equipped you might feel, don't run away from it. Okay? Those initial conversations may save you such a lot of heartache further down the line. All right? If you're listening to someone, what are you trying to achieve? You're trying to achieve being human with them. You're not there to work miracles. You can't fix everybody. That's not what you're there to do. And I'll talk about boundaries in a second. But actually being genuinely interested. In some of the conversations I've had recently, when I've asked a question about how are you doing? What are you doing to look after yourself? How are things? How's things at home? The emotion that comes to the surface is because, first of all, somebody's asked. And secondly, I'm really interested. That's all it is. Okay, so that's we get caught up in what you've got to do in school as the school job. And I know you'd all love to be talking about education and curriculum all the time at the moment, as opposed to COVID. But actually being human with another human and giving them that space is really important. You might not be able to solve the problem, but you might be able to know somebody who can. You want to encourage them to solve their own problems. So use coaching skills, push it back. So if you've got somebody who's really anxious, they might not be able to, if you say to them, what would you like us to do about that? Katie said earlier, they might have an idea, might have a really clear idea about what they need from you, but they might not, because they might not be able to get that perspective. But asking them, how can we help you? What needs to be in place? Asking open questions is always going to create more of a conversation than you trying to rescue. And you want them to learn how to do this for themselves, so they're not having to come to somebody all the time. So your coaching skills and asking open, pushing that back is going to be what's really helpful. Encourage them to tell their story. As my nana would say, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So use them, as she used to say. I should be off about something, I would probably think. You use your own questions. How are you feeling? Rather than are you feeling angry or sad or whatever. Don't put words in their mouth, because that creates a whole, you take the conversation and you're directing it. And try and avoid platitudes like, it'll get better, I'm sorry, they're there, you know, because that doesn't help. All that does is disempower the other person. It doesn't empower them. You want to be empathic as opposed to sympathetic. If you are somebody who worries about confrontation, then think about, are you the right person to have the conversation? Try and not assume that there's going to be confrontation. If you're in a meeting with somebody and you think, actually, I don't know, and I'm starting to panic and feel emotional, which you might, just breathe and give yourself a minute before you have to respond. You don't have to reply to everything. It's like when you get that email, and Jane was saying, you put your reply out and you just want to hit send and just watch it uproar, play out everywhere. And you don't. You rehash it until you're happy to send it. It's the same thing in the room. You know, you don't have to respond right away. You can take a moment to think and breathe and give yourself time to think. The main thing is that you represent yourself well. That's actually what it comes down to, that you are there and you are you. If somebody is looking for advice, use the coaching skills, but also use silence as well. We need a bit of time to think when we're having these kinds of conversations. And if you don't like silence, then reflect on what that's about, because you might be filling it and wanting to fill it all the time. And actually, that isn't always helpful for people. So think about using silence, step back, let them fill it as well. And you're more likely to talk if you give space for that. If you're looking about self-disclosure, do you tell them something that helps them about yourself? Yeah, I know exactly how you feel, because when I had that, I did X, Y, and Z. Maybe you should try it. They're not you. And is that self-disclosure actually helping them? You know, if it's going to help them, then great. If you can empathize, then brilliant. But if it's not, and you're trying to make light of a situation, distract from it, step away from it, you know, and joke about it, then that's probably not going to be a good intervention. And be quite strict with yourself about that, because you can come away from something thinking, oh, why did I do that? Why did I say that? If someone doesn't want to talk, you can't make them. You know, you can provide opportunity, you can provide space for it, but if you don't want to, it might not be the right time and you might not be the right person. So, you know, you might want to bring in somebody like Fortis, you might want to bring in somebody else from their team to support them. You know, just think about, actually, it's not personal, it just might not be the right time. The other thing is, what if you don't like the other person? So we've all worked with people we don't really like. And I know if you've got your video up, I know you're nodding. We've all worked with people that we don't like. So just because we don't like them doesn't mean to say that we can't work with them. All right. But you do have to manage your assumptions, your judgments, your responses in how you approach that person. So try not to let those assumptions that you're making block how you listen. So we talk about red flags. So it'll be a red flag like, really irritates me when you do that. I can't believe you just said that. Your views are completely different to mine. You know, all of this. Try and just suspend those and put them to one side and just be there with the person. The other thing you might find is that there might be someone that you need to manage and deal with who triggers feelings for you. They might remind you of someone. It might be a situation that's familiar. That's called transference in psychotherapy. And we work with transference. It gives you an awful lot of information about how that person might be being perceived by others, if you're feeling that way as well. So acknowledge that that's there for yourself. and recognise that they're not that person, or it's not the same situation. You also might feel that there's projection going on. So are they projecting onto you, and what are you projecting onto them? These are all the dynamics. This is all the unsaid stuff that goes on in these conversations. This is why it's so knackering. Think about your biases. You know, what are you biased about? Is it the age, the gender, the issues? What's your unconscious bias that might be coming into that? And again, if the person's looking for your attention or trying to get you to rescue them, or they're coming from a place of poor old me, which can be really irritating if someone's not helping themselves, think about, what is that actual behaviour about? Don't overlook it. It's okay for people to look for attention. You know, it's just what you do with that. If someone can't verbalise how they're feeling, then we do things like creative reflective practice sessions with staff and groups so that people don't have to talk. They can maybe work through it in another way. We do creative therapies. You know, sometimes we just haven't got the language. And basically, if someone's angry, try not to ask why questions. If you start asking why, it's like with children, you start to flood the brain with all the chemicals that trigger the hippocampus, which means that they can't think straight anyway. So try and ask those questions later and provide a safe place for someone to talk to you in the moment. So just to finish, if we're looking at the ripple effects of this year, there's a lot that's gone on. But what can you do around this Christmas time to be able to be thankful, show gratitude, celebrate successes that you've had? You've done an amazing job, in really difficult circumstances. Collaborate with your teams, look at reflections. What can you do to help with connectedness next year? It's mainly, you're doing it with parents and children all the time. It's about the staff, really, from what I can see and from what you've said there. And if you need any help or any support, then talk to any of us, depending on what stage you're at and what you need. And that's me. So if you would like to, if anybody wants to raise their hand, if you go into your participants box, you can raise your hand in there, and then we'll come to you and ask questions, answer your questions, hopefully. Anybody wants to?
Alexis, while we're waiting, in case anybody does, we've got just a few questions that have come through the chat. So Anne said, Anne Platt, do you have a well-being question template that you've mentioned?
Yeah, so we've done some wellbeing questionnaires in schools that we're working in at the moment, doing quite big pieces of work. Some of the heads are on the call. And we've developed some wellbeing questionnaires and surveys that we use for staff to just get a sense of temperature check, really, to see where people are at. If we can't get everyone together, it's the quickest way of doing it.
So Anne, I think if you and Alexis get in contact, hopefully Alexis can assist with you. She's put again, Anne said, are they COVID related, or I assume, do they cover everything?
Yeah, no, it's to do with staff wellbeing generally. So we've deliberately not gone into loads of things around COVID, because yes, it's part of the picture, but there's other things going on for people as well.
Okay, another question for you, Alexis, you're very popular. Kirsty said, what were those standards that you mentioned earlier? You talked about some standards. Yes,
it's called NOS, National Occupation Standards for Teaching and Learning. She says, trying to make sure she's got that right.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
I know, it trips off the tongue. But it's a lot around, lots of courses are developed from it. UK's National Occupational Standards for Teaching and Learning. And there's, I can send you the link out. If people are interested, I'll send the link out for that, so you've got access to it.
Thanks. I hope that's answered Anne's and Kirsty's issues or questions. Have we got anybody else who's going to raise their hand? Come on. We always get questions. We know. Come on, put the hand up. Somebody. We haven't even got any prizes to give today, Jane, have we?
Jane, you're muted.
Yeah, we usually bribe you into asking questions, don't we? And we always say, come on, teachers, you're always telling the kids to put their hands up. You must be brave enough to put your hands up yourselves. We've had 1 or 2 people feeding back and saying that they've enjoyed the session. If we can't help you with anything else, we will be sending out just a little feedback form after that's going to be coming out tomorrow. I know it's a pain and you probably forget to do it, but and you've got lots of other things to do, but we really do welcome your feedback as to whether you've enjoyed what we've heard today, what else you might want to do. Oh, somebody's asking they can't find the hands up.
Anne wants to speak.
It's on click participants and then the bottom right button, I'm being told. So yes, we will send out, as I'm saying, well, just before we come to that, we will be sending out a little survey questionnaire. We love running these sessions for you, know we do, and whether that's in person or virtually, we hope we'll get together again with you again after Christmas at some point. So if there's particular topics within schools that you'd like us to all talk about in our own different ways, we'd be very happy to do that. Might even give you a free brunch box again. Yeah, do let us know if there's anything else we can do, and we'll be sending.
I think Anne has raised a hand, Jane, just so you know.
Yes. Go on then, Anne, fire away.
Okay, what if the issue of staff anxiety and morale is actually emanating from trustees and not relations within the school? So the unpaid workforce that are not a daily presence, who may have made a decision that impacts on all staff and staff morale. How do you manage that?
Is this for me?
It's for anybody who feels they can answer that.
Well, I think I'd say it's always a difficult relationship. It's a bit like when we do work, which we do a lot of work with local authorities, and you've got councillors interfering with it's the same sort of relationship, because obviously I talked a lot, didn't I, about policies and procedures, and they all inform either the employment relationship or the relationship with parents and students, and those are quite well documented relationships with sort of parameters, etc. Relationships with governors, trustees, those or other individuals on that sense are more difficult because you don't have direct control. I mean, in a very basic way, it comes back to communication. So if staff are raising a concern, you can't just hide behind that, oh, well, the trustees have nothing to do with us, never mind. So you should be encouraging staff to put down what it is they feel they've got a concern about, encouraging meetings. I don't know if you have communications between, and there is a certain level of distrust I find in certain schools and with certain relationships where they don't really like the trustees coming around and having a look at what's going on. But I think if you can encourage that sort of meeting, communication meetings once a term, or a dial-in session where you can put questions, or ask the people to put their concerns in and take it to the next trustee meeting. Say, staff have been raising these issues, could we have some comments back so that we can feed back them? It's about getting that dialogue going, really, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, you're right, it can be quite a tricky relationship to manage that, and in the end, as you say, trustees are volunteers who are giving up their time, but that doesn't give them the excuse to be rude or uncommunicative or unhelpful. So, there ought to be that dialogue where it's really putting the two parties together in some way, either virtually or through a question and answer session, which makes people feel connected. We're back to the school community again, and trustees, you're right, we haven't really mentioned, are very much part of that school community and have a different sort of impact. So yes, I think it's a bit woolly, but I think that's the answer. Get the communication going.
Okay, and what if you've done all that and that's made it worse?
Oh dear, right, well then you may need to call in the cavalry, I suppose. I mean, mediation, seriously, mediation is a different skill to just getting people to talk to each other. That's with some skilled input from Alexis and her team to get people to understand the different, often it's about understanding the roles and the boundaries and how those fit together. Yeah,
okay, thank you.
Anybody else want to join in before we say goodbye to you all and let you get on with your busy days? Well, thanks. We've had a few nice comments filtering through, so thank you for that. Yeah, do hope you'll join us in our next session. Do feedback when you get our email through. Thank you. We'll be sending out some top tips by email, and always happy to talk to you, any of you, at any time, of course. Great, thanks ever so much, and good luck with the rest of term. Stagger on. Is it too early to say happy Christmas? Everybody's got their tree. No. So, Katie's had her tree up for 3 weeks, so we'll say happy Christmas. So yeah, anyway, good to see you all the best, and do take care and keep in touch. Bye-bye.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye.